Today, we are going to be talking about buyer representation and protecting compensation. In light of the Sitzer-Burnett case, so that we're all familiar with, our industry has been under attack, particularly the buyer agent commission and the compensation. Many of the agents in our industry have been working with buyer representation agreements, while others are thinking that there's going to be an appeal, that nothing is going to change with all the lawsuits that are happening. But the smartest and most successful realtors out there right now are not worried about what happens if there's an appeal or there's not an appeal, because they have been working with buyer representation agreements, as I said earlier, and they've never relied on the listing broker to put their compensation into the listing agreement and determine what their income would be. So having said that, Jay is on our call right now, and he's going to moderate a panel of agents across the country who have been successfully working with buyer representation agreements. And we're going to hear from them what is working for them and how they have handled any of the objections that they hear. Some of the agents on our panel do not know Jay, and others do know Jay. We really wanted to get a really great mix of agents, brokers from different states in different experience levels, so that we can all learn from our peers. That's the best thing that we can do. I hope that you find this very helpful. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. At about 12:40 Eastern Standard Time, we are going to go to the chat, and those questions will be delivered to our panelists. So I hope you enjoy. With no further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Jay.
Thank you, Miss Victoria. Appreciate it. Thanks, guys, for everybody for joining us. This is I don't want to say controversial, but it's something that has definitely popped up here recently. And as Victoria said, there's a lot of different varying of opinions of what's going to happen. We're going to talk a little bit about that today. But what I decided to do is I decided to take top 10 questions that I get as a broker from agents who question buyer broker representation, collecting your fee. And as Victoria said, how do I stop letting the listing agent dictate my income? Because that's kind of what you're doing if you don't have one, ultimately. And that's not a shade or a slight. That's just the reality of the world we live in. So I came up with 10 really good questions, and I want to ask each one of the panelists these questions. And we're going to get a varying degree of answers, but I think it's all going to be very similar, because these guys do a really, really good job of becoming the best CEO of their little business, right? So some of you guys have big businesses. I always call teams and agents independent CEOs of their little brokerage within a brokerage, right? So, having that mindset of not letting somebody else dictate your income is really the basis of these questions. But the questions really will go through and highlight some of the fears that you guys have, and I know what they are. I was that guy. I was the guy who was scared to death to go walk into a buyer presentation and present some sort of buyer broker agreement, loyalty agreement, and I avoided it. And my cop out was that, they don't want to work with us, I don't want to work with them, right? So that was my I'm just gonna sweep this under the rug and just not worry about it. So anyway, without further ado, I do want to ask these questions. I know we only have an hour on this, and some of these questions may go a little long. So as Victoria said, please put those in the chat, because we don't want to miss some of your questions. But I think some of these are going to be answered pretty well, and you may want to expound on those. So, okay. So I'm going to start with Christine first, just because I was going through my questions and I thought, these are really good questions, and I'm actually curious on how they're going to be answered. But so number one is, what steps did you take in your business to guarantee your fee from your buyers?
I think we really just became committed at making sure we were having expectation conversations at the beginning of the relationship. Too often, and obviously this is just from doing things not the right way, that didn't go the way we wanted it to, right? And realizing that there is a better way. And we started to realize that the best thing for the client is always the best thing for us. And the best thing for the client is always to start a professional relationship with realistic expectations. And the realistic expectation is that I offer great value, great service, but unfortunately, I can't work for free. And establishing my professional fee up front and, really unpacking everything that my professional fee means to the buyer.
Yeah, great question. And I think that's a great answer too, because a lot of agents think, oh, well, I see what's in it for me, right? I'm going to get paid, I'm going to get my fee, but really what's in it for the buyer? And I think you're absolutely spot on. The expectation from the buyer is so important. In fact, Brett and I were talking yesterday about this. A lot of you guys have heard of the company 72 Sold, and they did an amazing job here in the last 3 years promoting their brand. Well, we were talking about it, and their pitch was that they were selling houses for 72 hours. Well, from 2020 to 2022, they weren't the only agent selling houses for 72 hours, but they were the loudest, and they had the best marketing and the best system out there to tell people. So I think what we do is we have to be really good about setting those expectations and letting the buyer know what is in it for them. Like, what's the value they get? We're going to get to that in a second. But that's so important, because I do believe that we tend to do buyer consultations, yet we don't necessarily do buyer presentations. And so, and that's another thing we're going to get into. So that's a great answer, because that's exactly the first step. And for whatever reason, I'm going to bring this up a couple times. I think as a society, as a culture, we are very afraid to talk about money. We have a difficult time bringing up fees and money, because we just think that the buyer's going to eject out of the seat from the conference room and bolt out the front door and say, I'm never, they expect us to get paid. They know we're getting paid. Don't be sheepish about telling people what you get paid. And I think that's okay in the right context. Great answer. Okay. Number 2, how were you able to easily have a conversation with your past clients about compression of commissions, and how did you approach the buyer broker agreement or loyalty agreement when you didn't do it prior, as you started doing it, right? So the question is, or the fear is, hey, Jay, I've sold this guy a house or this lady a house 10 times, and now I may have to come up and talk about a buyer broker agreement or a loyalty agreement. I never had to do that before with them. As a stranger, it's a little easier, but as somebody who knows you and never had that experience with you, how do you broach that?
Is this question still for me?
Sorry, that's for you. Sorry, Christine. Yep, that's yours.
Okay, awesome. I was hoping it was for me, because I'm ready to answer this one. Yeah, so I have actually had this come up, right? And I work in the Orlando market. I started my real estate career in Arizona. There was some commission compression in Arizona, but not as much as Florida. So first transaction I did with a client, right? My full professional fee was covered by the seller, by the listing agent. I didn't have to have the conversation. But round 2, when they were a repeat client, so happened that the home that they fell in love with had a deficit. And, there's 2 ways to have this conversation. You can backpedal into it, which is awful and torturous for both of us. And there's no way that it can't put a wedge in the relationship, right? But the better way, which learning from experience that we now do, is, and I use this framework in a lot of things, is, we have to have an expectations conversation. But here's where we've been with the industry. Here's where we are with the industry. And here are the solutions around it, right? And when we talk about this as like, here's what's happening in my industry, and here's part of my responsibility to you, so that I can do just as good of a job for you as I did the first time around, our past clients have no problem getting on board with it. In fact, I think it's easier with previous clients, because they've already been through the process. They already see the value that you offer.
Yeah, good point. We're so easy to assume that people know what's going on in our market. I did a couple years back, I did a video. My old coach did this, called Man on the Street. And we walked around the city of Scottsdale, and we asked people randomly. Believe it or not, it was very hard to get people to talk on camera. But, ask them about what CMA meant. What does these verbs, these terms mean? And nobody had a clue. I'm like, what does CMA mean? They're like, Country Music Awards. I'm like, okay. So we use these terms that we think that people know. So to your point, I think we're also assuming that people know that the compression of commissions is there, or particularly now when all these people now see these lawsuits and things that are going on. I think more than ever, we have to be really transparent about that. So to your point, Christine, I think that's great. They already know you, like you, and trust you. They don't want you to not make money. In fact, these are the most fiercest, loyal people you have. So they want to make sure that you get paid? So I think that's the easy question. But in people's mind, I think it's like, wow, how do I bring that up? And it's just like a news flash, like, hey, things have changed in our industry, right? Things have been adjusting. As you may have seen, this is kind of how it works now. This is the standard of, or this is basically how the structure of commissions work. And I think for a lot of you, I know some of you guys will answer this, but if you don't have in your buyer presentation a slide or some kind of presentation on the flow of money and how commissions are paid, I think that's a miss, because that's a great way to get into that conversation, because it's going to come up in their mind. And the last place you want that to come up is when they're signing docs at the title, right? Or at your attorney's, wherever you're at. And the attorney or the title agent has to explain what line this is with this big fee on it that is, going to the brokerage. Oh, that's the agent commission. And they're like, geez, Christine, nice payday, right? So, and if you don't have that conversation, it's a bit awkward. So anyway, great answer. I think that's awesome. Does anybody want to pipe in on that before we move on to the next? No? Okay, good. Great. Thanks, Christine. I might come back. There's a couple other questions. We had one more panelist that didn't make it, so we have extra questions that I might come back and tap you on. So excellent. Okay. And I feel so bad because I didn't even introduce Christine. So I apologize. She is a team leader there in Orlando, Florida. And so next we're going to go to Evan Dua, and he is with Authentic Home in Charleston, South Carolina, which is very cool because it's not just based in one area. So Evan, can you describe to me what your buyer presentation consists of to help you get your fee?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm going to piggyback off of what you shared, Christine, because I think if you have this expectations conversation very, very early on with your clients after you've developed rapport, like this is the easiest thing in the world. So I'm glad you didn't ask one of the questions you asked, Christine, because like since day one, I got started in 2015, and that's how I was trained initially, was to have these conversations up front. So the way I do it is I start by just developing rapport with the prospective buyer, talk about who we are, and then I go through a long list of everything that we do for our buyer clients. And then I'm going to check off every single commitment that I'm going to make to them throughout the process. One of those things that I have at the very bottom of it, I think it says like one question asked cancellation policy. And that is basically me saying, I'm going to do all these things and I want a fire under my butt the entire time. I want you holding me accountable to doing those things. And if I miss any one of those things, I have a cancellation policy where you can cancel our agreement at any time throughout the entire process. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask you, what was it that I could have done better to ensure that I earned that fee? And then we'll go through a full needs and wants analysis with them. And then I'm just doing a really deep dive into the market, what's happening in the market. I want to present myself as the highest level professional for them so that they get to the end and they're like, golly, this guy knows what he's doing. I can't imagine working with anybody else. Then we go through a buyer roadmap, basically show them every, checkpoint along the whole process, what it's going to look like. I'll tell them that this is kind of funny. Some agents on here may not like this, but I always tell them that my job is to make them smarter than the average real estate agent by the time they're done with this process. Mm-hmm. And then I'll jokingly say, and that's not difficult to do.
The bar is a little low. We're all just jest here, guys. We're just playing.
That's it. And it always gets a laugh out of them. But that's the whole idea, is that we want to just break down that whole sales barrier. This isn't a big sales conversation. It's just earning their trust and presenting value, and then asking for just compensation in return, just like any other business.
So are you actually bringing up, do you have a presentation on commission and how that works, and walking through like, here's how I get paid, here's my fee, like here's typically what you see? Is that part of the presentation?
It's not. And I've recently been having conversations around how, the changes in the industry and what we can anticipate. I've always said 9 out of 10 times the seller will pay my fee. And in the rare situation that they don't, they're responsible for the delta. So it's more of a verbal conversation, but I took a note when you said that before. I absolutely will be adding that slide.
Yeah, I think it's a good way just to, you know, the ejection button doesn't get pushed when you bring up commission, right? They don't fly out and go. But at least what it does is it sets that tone that there is going to be that discussion further on, because you know, some people definitely have a case of amnesia when money comes up. So it's good to have. So good, I love it. Great answer. Anybody else want to parlay on that? Anybody want to have a pipe in? No? Okay. Cool. All right, Mr. Evan, how difficult was it to add the buyer broker agreement or the loyalty agreement to your business as an SOP, as a standard operating procedure? How easy was it just to say, okay, at this point, or this is what I'm going to do from here on out, no questions asked?
Yeah, probably a little bit different for me than maybe some others on here. Like I said, I started in 2015. I've done it since the get-go.
So you didn't have any bad habits.
Yeah, exactly. It's just been something I've always done. But you know, one of the things that I always do is early on in the process, whether I'm on the phone with them or whatever it is, I'll ask them up front what they're looking for in a realtor, or I'll ask them the 3 most important things that they're looking for in a realtor. And literally 100% of them always say that one of them is just honesty or transparency or someone that they can trust.
Yep.
So when I'm going through that buyer presentation, meeting with them for the consultation, I'll bring that up and I'll ask them again, hey, when we initially spoke, you mentioned that you were looking for an honest agent that you can really trust and can be transparent with you. Do you still feel the same way? And they're going to say, absolutely. And then I'll be like, fantastic. Well, one of the things that I want to do right now is I'm going to go into this agency disclosure. I just want to explain to you how the real estate industry works in general and talk to you about different options that you have. And that's kind of just something that I've always done. So it wasn't really difficult to add in. Maybe in the beginning, it was a little bit hair raising.
So when you ask that question, how many buyers stand up and go, hey, Evan, I already know how it works. I'm good. You don't have to talk to me about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably any high D that's already bought a home.
Yeah. But my guess is that the majority are like, oh, okay, well, I'd love to hear your opinion on this, right? So, I mean, I think the majority probably would be open to hearing it. They don't go, oh, yeah, you don't have to. Unless, yes, a high D personality who's just like, hey, man, bottom line me, what's the fee? Let's go out. Let's go look at some houses. So
that's it.
Yeah, totally. Good. And to your point on that, too, the transparent piece, back to what Christine said, is that it is so important. And I remember when, what was it, last year or year before, when the commission to the public display of commission on the Plano or on the MLS, is that in everybody's? Is that as a national thing, right? That's not a okay. When everybody was all up in arms about, oh my God, the buyer's going to see the commission on the on the MLS sheet, I'm like, are you kidding me? That makes our job easier. That's so much more simple. Yeah. Anybody want to pipe in on that? Did you guys all have the same feeling?
Well, Redfin was displaying buyer agent commission for a while, and I think they're seeing it in advance. So if you've already had the expectation conversation, they expect that there's going to be a conversation around deficit, right?
Agreed.
And I did just want to chime in. You had asked about buyer broker agreement, and some states like Colorado, from what I understand, some brokerages, it is a requirement that that all transactions have a buyer broker agreement signed. Some kind of crazy states like Florida, most agents don't even know what a buyer broker agreement is. Yep. I was kind of brought up in Arizona where we did know what it was, but it's very like legally and very IRS feeling. Mm-hmm. And that's why I came up with something that was warm and softer. I think, Jay, you probably have something similar. I call it the buyer advantage. Okay. That is just very like soft, but punctual language about all of the commitments that I'm making to the buyer, searching for off-market properties. And the thing about this is that you can't just put a bunch of stuff on your value proposition sheet that sounds good. Like, you actually have to do it. If you say you're going to go after off-market properties, you really need to be able to produce some case studies around finding an off-market property for a previous client. And our buyers, they're very emotional, and they're going to connect in the best way with stories. So the best example that I like to use is a for sale by owner. For instance, if you fall in love with a for sale by owner, many times they're not offering any compensation at all or very little. That may be a case where, you may have to come in with the difference. And I like to say that, give an example, that there have been a couple of clients that have had to fill a deficit just to better prime them that and create like a similarity framework that this has actually happened. Most of the time, I have been able to negotiate the seller to pay for my fee. But I think when you are telling them that this actually happened, they're even more prepared to come in with that. And I think that that might be a little bit more important to do as we go deeper into the situation and we're collecting more deficits and bigger deficits.
Yeah, and I think it's also important because, I mean, ultimately to me, a buyer agent commission deficit is no different than a closing cost, right? It's a fee that they have to come up with. Why surprise them at closing, and bring it up? It's just part of the transaction. Yes, we're going to try to get it from the seller. We're always going to try to negotiate it with the listing agent. Obviously difficult when you have lower inventory homes and the supply and demand is tilted more towards the seller, which has been for the last 4 years. So, but yeah, I mean, there's other ways to do it, but just bringing in the fact that it's up. And to your point, I love, we called ours the loyalty agreement, which I think I know what it is, being part of that coaching program. But yeah, we've kind of modified it a little bit. We call that our backstage pass, right? So basically, your backstage pass is this. We know once you sign an agreement with us that you may go on Zillow, Redfin, you may go into an open house, you may go to a new build. Just want to let you know this is how it works, right? So let them know you're under contract. So anyway, I think that word track is going to be different for everybody, but I think the conversation is definitely going to need to be happening much sooner than most. And I didn't realize that Florida was a much more compression than Arizona, although I have heard that. So I know Arizona and Florida tend to be the tip of the sword when it comes to that kind of stuff. So anyway, cool. All right, good. Any questions or any thoughts on that? Any questions from you guys or any input from you guys that you want to add to that, what Christina and Evan just mentioned?
Okay, cool. I just want to say,
yeah,
go ahead.
The only other thing I would add is there are some states, I believe, for instance, Massachusetts, where it is actually a legal requirement for that agency conversation to be had with buyers and an employment agreement to be signed. So I have friends in other states, and when all this started to come about, they were like, we don't understand it because we've always operated this way. Mm-hmm. And they can't, for instance, here in Arizona, it's inconceivable to them that we don't do that or aren't required to do it. And it actually piggybacks off of that, because if you're in a market that's an inbound market, as all of us are in, and you have buyers coming from those states that have bought and sold homes in those states before, and you don't have that process, there's a disconnect in their expectations of what it's supposed to be like when that's not delivered.
Well, good point. Because one of the things that I always think about is like, I always bring up the plumber, right? You got a plumber come to your house and, they give you an estimate, but let's say you had a plumber come to the house and he's like, yeah, I can fix that. And okay, cool. When can you do it? Oh, I can do it tomorrow. So they come, they fix your pipe. You've signed nothing. You have no quote. And you're like, how do I pay this? Like, how does this work? And I think you're absolutely right. That's the expectation from people coming from other inbound places, that they're kind of like, this seems a little loosey-goosey here. We're not, we're not signing anything. We don't have any obligation. It seems kind of odd. I feel, this is just my opinion, but I do feel that the more you can tighten up your agreements, whether it's a presentation, the agreement, the loyalty agreement by broker, whatever, I think people really feel at ease. They get that warm and fuzzy feeling that, hey, I'm with a professional. And anytime you ever buy something or subscribe to something and you're like, oh, it's a little high on the price, but once you do it, you are 100% in. Like, you are so engaged now and that's what I want from buyers, and that's what I want from sellers. So ultimately, I want to be the prescription to their illness. And so the first thing you do when you leave the doctor's office and he's like, man, your vitals, whew, I'm going to give you some medicine and we got to go. The first thing you do is get in your car and go to the pharmacy, right? That's exactly what I'm trying to do for the industry with buyers and sellers. But if you don't have that process, it's not that hard to fix. And to Evan's point too, like, you grew up doing it, from 2015 on, he didn't know any different. So for a lot of us who've been in the business for a lot longer and we built up bad habits, or we didn't get exposed to that, some of you guys are thinking, how in the world am I going to collect a fee from my buyer when I'm already collecting a fee from the listing agent? So that is a question I didn't put on here, but I do want to bring that up because I think that's important. I'll bring that up last, but that is, I think, the biggest mind-blowing thing is, what if they say no? Or what if they don't have the funds, right? Those things come up. What if it's VA? What if it's, what if it's an appraisal issue? So we'll bring that up at the last bonus question, I guess. So, all right, cool. Any other thoughts on that? Victoria, Scott, anybody, you want to bring up anything at this point? Okay, cool. Awesome. All right, let's move on to Mr. Brett. Mr. Brett, speaking of which, how were you able to collect the delta in the commissions from what the listing agent offers and your fee other than having your buyer pay for it?
Sure. Well, I think one of the first things to discuss, Jay, and is important to understand, kind of gets a lot of contention with people when we bring it up, but the buyer is actually the one that pays all the commissions anyway. Okay. The buyer is the only one bringing money to the table, both directly and through their lender. Okay. It is routed historically, typically through the seller activating their equity to the listing brokerage, and from the listing brokerage, the cooperation to the selling brokerage or the buying brokerage. Okay. But it's all the buyer's money.
Yep.
So the buyer pays all commissions. That's the first thing to actually understand, whether directly or through that flow of money. Okay. But people don't understand that. And we've already discussed that. That's important to have that conversation so people are aware.
Yeah. So for reference there, let's all not say our services are free because A, we can't anymore, but B, it's not free. Yeah. So that never made sense to me. I'm like, well, I'm getting paid, so how's it free? So anyway, fire away.
Yeah. Unless it is in fact actually free. So they incorporated that into 2020 thanks to the Department of Justice. So it is a part of the Realtor Code of Ethics that it's prohibited from saying that. So, but how do we collect it if there's a delta and not as a direct closing cost of the buyer? So what we're talking about is we've had a conversation with our buyer and they've agreed to employ us for whatever the fee is. Okay, you have your number in your business, and the cooperating commission from the listing brokerage is less than your particular fee. For sake of illustration, let's just say it's 0.5%. Okay, there's that difference. That's the delta, the difference between your fee and what the cooperating commission is. So in most markets, and here in Arizona, definitely, the best way to do it is that it is a part as a closing cost of the buyer. So it is a closing cost the buyer would incur. So what instead we're going to do is we're going to incorporate it in as seller concessions to the buyer. So that 0.5% would be a seller concession to the buyer, which would alleviate those funds that the buyer would have to bring to closing. This was a bit challenging in 20 and 21. We still were able to get it done in many cases. And then beginning in 22, with increasing interest rates and the popularity of seller paid rate buy downs, that became the seller was contributing money anyway, and we were able to add that as well. So that's typically the most straightforward way, and that keeps it clean and in compliance with most agreements that I've seen in most states. One of the things that typically happens, I will just say from experience, is I get a call from the buyer's agent when it's my listing, and they will ask either if I will pay them more, understanding that for us, the listing brokerage controls the cooperating commission, unless otherwise stated directly by the seller, or they will ask, will the seller actually pay more? So they will ask for that. The key there being is that typically they do not have a buyer agency or a buyer broker or whatever the equivalent form is in a market. They don't have that in place with their client. They just want higher commission, but they haven't had that conversation with their buyer in most cases. Some they have, and they just don't want their buyer to pay the delta. But in many cases, it's they would like to be compensated more, but they haven't had the preliminary conversations leading up to that.
Agreed. So to piggyback on that, obviously you can contact the listing agent, putting it in the sales price, right? People don't realize you can do that, assuming it appraises, right?
Right.
Closing costs, which I know you brought up. So that's another thing too, depending. And guys, all this is specific to your state, your broker. We're talking about loyalty agreements and buyer broker agreements. If you're going to change anything, make sure you get your blessing on that with your broker. We don't want to be, we have great examples of it. And I think at one point we'll probably share those because I think that's going to be a question that's going to come up. But to your point, the process in which you have to do that. For instance, if you have a delta, whatever that delta is, if buyer's like, hey, I can't pay it, I'm capped out on my cash. What's your next step? Like, what's the step you take next at that point to go, okay, I got to figure out how to pay it. Like, what's the easiest way to do it?
Well, sometimes it's actually a resistance to it, right? So I have had clients where we had the conversation on the front end, everybody signed off on it, and then we had the delta conversation about the house that they loved, and they loved the house, but they weren't happy about the delta, the difference. Okay. And so we had that conversation about, well, let's look at the different ways that it can be done. Also, I'm not going to let this stand in the way of actually doing my job and procuring this house for you. Okay. So if you're not satisfied with the second half of my job, we found the house, now we have to actually acquire it. If you're not satisfied with the second half, then we'll discuss that, and I'd be happy to waive that difference. That's also the business decision that can be made, right? It's not always collecting. Sometimes it is, in fact, dismissing it, and you just make that business decision. Sometimes this is with first-time buyers, VA buyers currently with the current setup. Some other circumstances you mentioned being just tapped out. They're already applying all the equity for all the cash that they have to make the purchase. So in those circumstances, we make the decision, look, the lifetime value of this client, right? This is not the last house probably they're going to be buying or selling. So is that delta an investment into my business for future? Because the lifetime value of that. Or another great way is also to trade for it, meaning, look, you're very happy about this house, and you're going to be talking to a lot of people. I want your total experience and the things that you're going to be talking about to be positive, and I'd be happy to waive that differential. But here's what I need in exchange. Within the next 5 weeks, I need 5 referrals from you, 5 people who are ready to buy or sell or thinking of buying and selling that I can have that conversation with, right? And so obviously that's good faith and goodwill in that particular case, but that is a way to do it because now you've engaged reciprocity with them. You've given them something in the form of waiving that difference and asked for something in exchange, and they're definitely in most instances going to do that. One final thing that we also do is in Arizona, and I'm not sure about other states, but in Arizona, we can actually set them up on a payment plan for the difference. And so that 0.5%, whatever that may be, over the period of time, they can pay the brokerage directly for that. And, of course, the money flows from there. But that's another way that we have seen that be accomplished.
Yeah, I think running your own independent little CEO of your business, you can make that decision. Of course, you got to make sure you're still under a brokerage if you're independent or your own broker or brokerage. I think that's a great way to do business. Agents ask me all the time, "Hey, this is a friend of mine or it's a family. Are you okay if I reduce my commission or if I give them a credit?" If it's good business, do what you think is good business, right? The problem is it becomes a slippery slope. And that's where I think sometimes agents tend to fall into more of a, well, I'm doing this, but I think I'm going to do this for everybody type thing, or it's easier to do it for everybody. We may not have an option at this point going forward because we don't really know what's going to happen. I think as Victoria said in the beginning that, a lot of people are speculating what's going to happen. And there's a vast majority of people who don't think anything is going to happen. I don't think upwards of $6 billion is going to elicit no change. I mean, when you think about the fee of the jury who deliberated for an hour and a half. Now, I don't personally think that was fair or whatever, but we all understand kind of what's going on here. But our discussion here basically is like, if whatever happens and our governing bodies say this is what's going to happen, we have to be prepared, right? We got to be prepared for nothing changes. which is probably the worst case scenario, because I'll tell you why. And then the opposite end is sharing of commissions becomes 100% illegal. Money has to flow through the list of the seller to the buyer agent, which a lot of states are trying to implement right now. But let's assume, this is not a question on the question, but let's assume it stays the same. If it stays the same, then compression will stay the same, and compression will speed up. Right. So a lot of MLSs now are saying, okay, you don't have to offer anything to a buyer broker, or buyer agent, right? You can be zero. And here in Arizona, I'm sure in Florida as well. I don't know about South Carolina, but we're seeing a lot of zeros, right? So I have agents who call me and they go, okay, this is the first time I've seen a zero. I'm like, well, thank God you've been coached really well for the last 5 years, so you know what to do, right? So, and they laugh and they're like, yeah, I know what to do. Where some agents just will lose it, right? I mean, could you imagine going out showing houses? You're schlepping a buyer. I mean that in a very nice way. But you're showing houses to people, 10, 15 houses. You come across the house they love and you look down and it offers nothing, zero compensation to the buyer. How do you, as Christine mentioned, how do you go back now and have that conversation? Woo, that's a little awkward and slightly unprofessional, I think. Anyway, so what we're trying to prepare you guys for is the inevitable. We don't know. None of us know. We can all speculate what's going to happen. But if you get into the, if you act like Evan from the day you started and that's ingrained in your business from day one, make sure you guys understand how to do it. Make sure you understand how to overcome objections and make sure that you're comfortable with it. Because like we said, it has to be a benefit to the buyer as well. And one thing I'll add to that is when I first started doing it, it was, okay, yeah, I want my fee because I feel like I'm a professional agent and I want to collect my fee. But I thought, what is it in it for them? And so I'll bring this up and I'll let you guys, we'll chat more about this and we'll get back to the last couple of questions is, having a conversation with a buyer saying, look, there are a lot of agents out there. Unfortunately, this is not a popular comment, but it is the truth. We all know it. Agents will filter, well, they can't now, but they won't necessarily show houses that offer them a commission that's not what they want, right? So in Arizona, there's no empirical data that says a low buyer agent commission provides a higher days in the market, lower list price ratio. But there are agents, and a lot of them say it on Facebook and verbally public, and I'm like, oh my God, that will not show houses if it doesn't meet their criteria. Now, if they have written authorization from their client, that's one thing, that's completely legal. So my pitch always to the buyer was, look, you're going to see everything from zero commission all the way up to infinity. My fee is this. Anything over this, I'll credit you back. Conversely, anything below this, there's a delta that we'll have to figure out how to make it up, and here's how we do it. And the reason I bring that up is because I want you to see every house, regardless of commission. Doesn't matter. Commission should never supersede what you see in finding you the perfect house. So, for instance, a for sale by owner. Off-market properties, those don't offer anything. Now they might, but you still got to approach them. You still have to ask them the question. But if that's the case, then that becomes a closing cost if there is no commission, and we have to make sure that the offer we offer or make is according to factoring that into the closing costs, right? So it's not that hard of a conversation. It's going to be tight for some people. Obviously, if all you have is your down payment money and you have nothing else, yeah, you got to get a little creative. We'll see what happens with lending should some of these rules come down. But for the most part, it's, having that conversation is the biggest hurdle, I think, for a lot of agents. Once you have it, then just trying to figure out where it comes from is going to be much easier for you guys. So do you guys do that? Do you have that conversation with them? Okay. Go ahead, Christine, you had a question?
Yeah, just, listening to you, you have such great insight around the whole topic. I think that so many agents still have their head in the sand. Even if this doesn't escalate as aggressively, we're going to continue to have commission compression, right? I think to really distill this down in a simple way where agents can not be so overwhelmed and full of anxiety about it is we've just arrived at a time where we need two skill sets that you may have not been using before. Presentation. To be a really great agent, you have to be a master presenter. This is all about setting expectation and delivering great presentation. And two, this is about deal structuring. And you don't know what you don't know, and it's totally not your fault. It's just how you were brought up in the industry. there are 17,000 different ways to be brought up in the real estate industry. There's not any congruent way to come up in this field. And I think, like, if any agent is stressed about this right now, there are actually a lot of agents who do have a solid grip on this, who have been presenting commission in a decoupled way for years, who are collecting buyer agency agreements. Like, get a mentor, like join a team who's already doing this, become part of a collaboration group. And by collaboration group, I don't mean like a 50,000 realtor group on Facebook who isn't following this well, right? Who is actually serious about taking this as an opportunity and has already the track record to do it. It's not as overwhelming as one may think it is.
No, and at the end of this, we'll talk about a couple different ways that you guys can do that. We are talking about having a certification program, which we'll talk to you guys about. But you're absolutely right, and this isn't about collusion either, right? This isn't about a whole bunch of agents getting together and talking about, oh, let's offer this fee and let's exclude, Brett because he, blah blah. Like, that has nothing to do with that, and that, of course, you guys got to be careful about. But I think you're absolutely right. It's just an SOP. It's just a standard of practice, no different than a listing presentation. And that is something that we're going to talk about. And that is my next question, actually, to Mr. Brett is...
Excuse me, Jay. This will have to be the last question because it is 12:40. I do want to hear your question too, Brett. So go ahead. But Brett, when you answer the question, please know that we are on time constraint because we do want to go to the chat.
You got it. Really quick. Why do most agents treat their buyers unlike they treat their sellers? Meaning, why do agents don't treat their buyers like their sellers? Presentation, contract, explaining the commission. Why do we just sweep it under the rug?
Yeah, that's actually, that is the main question, Jay. And Christine kind of hit on that. I love the fact that Evan kind of talked about it from his experience as well, because when, by and large, okay, most real estate schools, they teach the law of the land and the legal agreements, all of the things that go into becoming qualified to test for your license, right? They do not teach the actual practice of representing a client. Okay, so we learned that on the job, and there's no apprenticeship. There is no, not by and large. Of course, you can be on a team and have the fortunate thing or a brokerage that will train you, but it is typical experience, path of least resistance, meaning we get our license, we talk to the people we know, and we get in cars and show homes. Okay. So we're not taught to do this thing, this skill set, like Christine talked about, until one of those people that we sell a home to in a couple of years, they need to sell that home, right? Or somebody in our network, they need to sell a home and they ask us to help them do that. And then we learn on the fly the presentation and how to ask for the commission as a listing agent as opposed to a buyer's agent. And so we're just not taught that is the main thing. And so the way we fix that is we actually have the same mindset for our buyers that we do our sellers. And new agents, we help them to do the same thing, which is agency is definitely implied, but it needs to be written. And in order for it to be written, it needs to also be discussed and explained. And the fee, whatever that fee is, I don't think anybody expects us to work for free necessarily, but we need to become very, very skilled at explaining our value, explaining our benefit to them, how, like, why it matters to them and what the cost of that is. And as we become committed to doing that, all of the other stuff gets easier or goes away entirely. Yep, agreed. Cool. So yeah, the quick answer to that is yes. Next time you're on a listing presentation, think about that with a buyer. Just do the exact same thing with a buyer. And I think you guys will see a lot of success. Okay, so I know we're a couple minutes over.
Great point. Yeah, thank you so much. We do have quite a few questions. Great information, by the way. I want to really thank you all for sharing your experience and helping everyone who's listening. Hopefully that information is very beneficial to everyone who's watching. I do just want to remind everyone that everyone here on this panel is in different states, and you do need to check with your local state to see what the rules and regulations are, and your broker as well. Having said that, we're going to go to the chat, and our first question is from Darren. And the question is, where is the best place and when is the best time to have the buyer compensation conversation? Now, I know Evan did touch on this briefly, but maybe we can ask Evan again, and maybe some of the other panelists can weigh in on that.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I'll go through. I mean, the first job is I want to become their best friend and earn the trust, right? We just need to break down the sales wall that exists. And I do a lot of outbound cold calling, so there is a sales wall innately at our initial conversation. So once I've done that and I've gone through and really proven my value, I think one of the most impactful points in that is going through what's happening in the market, showing them days on market in the specific area that they're looking for, showing them the absorption rate in that area, showing how many homes, how many showings are happening per home. And then once we've gone through that, that's really when they're like, wow, this guy has a lot of data points. By the way, I pulled it all from the MLS. It's super easy for me to do, but I look like a genius at that point. And then I'm just going to ask them, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, are you as confident as I am that I'm the right agent to serve you through this process? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yeah, we feel really good about this. And then I'm going to go, fantastic. Well, I want to run through the different types of agency that exists and ask them, what level of value do you want from me? After that, I go into a needs and wants analysis. They don't see any homes or anything. We don't look at the MLS, nothing. I haven't actually done any work until they've signed an agency agreement.
So you're doing that initially at the initial appointment of meeting them.
Yeah.
And does everyone else agree with that?
Mhm.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
very good. Hope that answers that question. Stephanie just wanted to let everyone know that she loves that we're informing everyone about the market. And this is mentioned during the buyer consultation. So that was just really a comment. Margaret says that she agrees that we must know our value proposition. So she's happy that that came up. And then Stephanie again said her brokerage requires this as of January 1st. Then we have a question from Ryan. Ryan is asking, does anyone just send or show a video that explains this?
I do not. This is the most difficult portion, or potentially difficult portion, and it's also where, from Evan's point, the kind of the personal relationship or in-person dynamic is occurring. So it's very difficult to make an ask of that size simply from an automated way. We may use video to supplement some of our value proposition, but when we actually ask for the order, so to speak, in sales language, we have to do it directly, either in person or sometimes, like this week, I've done a couple via Zoom. But it is a one-on-one connection that we're making for that.
So I think that Jay hit on something super important, and I'm in the process of separating presentation and consultation. And I do think that because sometimes giving them both together, it is just so loaded and so much. And separating them, pre-recording something that delivers all of the transparency pieces in a very warm way, I think can go really far. A lot of us are doing pre-listing presentations, right? Priming sellers. So I think that at least what we're doing on our team, we're working on that now, kind of priming buyers. That way, when we're sitting down at the table, it can be all about them. Right? We're still asking, am I the right agent to take you through this process and getting stuff signed? But presentation and consultation, I think there's a lot of value in those being separate.
Yeah, great point. I think I want to bring that up real quick. We started a buyer presentation or buyer pre-sale package, I don't know, probably close to the same time, probably a couple years after the listing presentation, because I just thought, well, why wouldn't a buyer want one? And it really did help kind of solidify that process, because they get this book and they get, really nice whatever you have. And then we started doing the video cards where they open up and they see a greeting video from you, part of our listing and buyer presentation. So that could be something we can talk about more of, because that would definitely help, pre-sell them on you. And then, as you said, it's not a 2-hour presentation. It's a 30-minute presentation or 15-minute presentation, and then a 15-minute consultation about what they're looking for. So yeah, anything you guys can do to leverage that. And again, anytime people get things in the mail, you guys have used pre-listing packages, it just sets you above. Like, it just puts one more notch in your level of professionalism. It's hard to resist something that I always say good news comes in boxes and packages. Bad news comes in certified letters. So it's not a bad deal. Not a bad idea.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is the value proposition in a video works very well, but the compensation conversation should be done in person.
Yep.
Yeah. Evan, you agree with that as well?
Okay. I do, yeah.
Very good. We'll go to the next question is also from Ryan. And he says, when we were talking about free, when you said, please don't say that our services are free, he said, if it's a new build and they are not getting a discount without using a realtor, can they say it's kind of free?
No, in my opinion, is if you're getting paid, it's not free. Wherever that money, now, even if they're paying it, it's definitely not free. But if somebody else is paying it, it's still not free, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
No, yeah, the standard of practice is very clear on that. So, you don't have to be a realtor to be a real estate agent, but in practice, most of us are. And so the standard of practice for realtors is you may not say that your services are free unless you are in fact not being compensated at all for the services.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. Thank you for answering that for Ryan. And Margaret is agreeing with you about the buyer presentation. She said she sends a buyer agency video with Loom and the walkthrough to refresh their memory. Okay, so I'm reading this as I'm saying it, so forgive me. She just put that up there. So she's sort of agreeing that she's adding on to the presentation so that they don't forget anything, to just give them that quick reminder. We did have a few private messages that were anonymous, and there's two of them. One is, has anyone had opposition to buyer compensation being responsible by the buyer? And then the second part of the question is anyone using buyer representation agreements for the full commission and not just the delta?
Yeah, so I'll just briefly touch on that. We had a couple of our agents have to do that because of the zero compensation. Sorry, I got my little puppy who wants to be on the. He wants to be famous, such a ham. But he had to. One of my agents had to collect 100% of it, and he just had a conversation with the buyer and just said, we talked about this, and he had a conversation already, and they said, okay, well, that's fine, as long as we know what we have to come up with. Let's make sure that the offer we're making is going to, we don't want surprises, right? So I think once you start identifying what your fee is, when I first started going to buyer presentations, I would ask, hey, do you guys know how I get paid? And they're like, do we pay you? Like, they really didn't understand the flow of money. So traditionally speaking, it's odd for them to think that they're not going to pay you. Now, I think typically people think, oh, well, the seller pays the fee. No, that's not the case. But yeah, the long-winded answer to that question is yes, it does happen, as long as you have a very, very good conversation up front, and as long as you have a very good, transparent presentation. So yes, absolutely.
So when you're saying it does happen, you're talking about the 100% of the commission.
Yeah, exactly.
What about the opposition? Can maybe one of the panelists have any of you had any opposition, and how did you handle that?
I haven't been in a scenario where I've had to come up with 100% of it, except for in a sale by owners scenario. Like in Charleston, we just haven't seen many zeros yet. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, when you are showing your client that you are doing absolutely everything in your power to negotiate on their behalf so that they can have the least amount of money come out of their pocket possible, you've earned it at that point. And they also back you in you earning that, because you've done everything. If the seller in no way is willing to cover it and you've done everything possible, the buyer is always happy to, provided they're financially able to, they're happy to compensate you because they see the effort that you've put forth and you've earned it at that point.
That's awesome. And I love the fact that we asked this question about opposition and no one really said they had any opposition. And I'm chalking that up to the fact that you are all using buyer representation agreements. This is in practice for you. And the more you practice, the better you get at this. And you're probably not hearing that opposition. So that's a really great answer, because no answer is an answer. So anyone who's watching, if you're not using buyer representation agreements, this is a great way to start using them. I mean, we're hearing from our peers. This is not a training per se. This is what is working for, agents across America. So I want to thank you very much for this. Jay, fabulous. I want to turn this over to Scott, because Scott was really the organizer for this entire webinar, and this was his idea. And I think this is fantastic.
Well, I'm very, very pleased. I know that we're now entering what I call the new economy of real estate agent, buyer agent compensation. There's so much misinformation. There's so many social media pundits who are guiding our community. And I think that there really needs to be a guiding force, such as the members in this panel, who are willing to share their experiences and better equip professionals to actually get paid. If not, we and our clients and all the ethical requirements for those clients and our referral partners will suffer. So I think this is the only way going forward. These lawsuits are not going to stop, and the Department of Justice is not pleased. So without some type of, like we're providing and others, some training and experience and knowledge, is a bleak outlook.
And
I think we lost Scott. Jay, I'm going to you as our moderator. I know you've been training on buyer representation, which is why you are our moderator. If there's any last sentence that you want to end this on, that would be awesome. We are almost just about out of time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said before, we are going to have and present a certification for this. We're working on that right now, which is going to be very important for a lot of agents. But I think my advice really for a lot of agents is just don't be afraid to get into that conversation, get into the mindset to be able to set your fee, set, negotiate, and collect your fee, right? That is the biggest piece of advice that I could offer anybody in this business, because nobody wants to look down at the CD, right, as a buyer's agent and see that you're getting a very small number and the listing agent's getting a very big number, right? So it happens all the time. I get calls, it's a lot of my agents, it happens. But don't rely on a listing agent to set your fee. Don't rely on anybody to set your fee, because they don't know your value. Right? They don't know how long you work with that agent or that client, how long, like what the work that you've done to put in to get to this point. They just don't know. And that's not what the compensation is about. A listing agent compensation to a buyer agent is not about value. It's about a business decision. So you have to make a business decision and decide what your value is and what your worth is.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, once again, thank you, everyone. I think this was very valuable. There will be a link on our Facebook group. If you have registered, you will get that link. If you are a panel member or a moderator, feel free to take this link and share it with anyone that you choose to. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.